We got from Gators Online, Nick De La Torre on this Portal Monday. Nick, craziness today, man. How are we feeling? What's the latest with the Gators as it pertains to the transfer portal?
Well, I think Andy transferred. I went to my normal coffee place, didn't see him working out there this morning. But I think it's going to be really busy for Florida. I've tried to caution Florida fans and let them know, like, hey, Florida needs to get down to like 66 scholarships just to be able to sign their recruiting class. So there's going to be 15 to 20 guys that you're going to see hit the portal. And obviously some of them will be guys that have been around for a while, maybe have been around for more years than have snaps played. But then you've got names like Chris McClellan, who came out last night, who's a guy Florida would have liked to have kept. Trevor Etienne's a name that has been rumored to be looking at the portal. That one would sting. And Shamar James, every single time the portal opens, it seems like his name gets attached to it. And in the age of transfer portal and NIL, don't blame him. don't blame him.
So where is Florida at from a collective standpoint, Nick? Where do they rank in terms of the rest of the SEC and then the rest of the state when you're dealing with Miami and Florida State?
Yeah, it's interesting. It looks like Florida State has had maybe a late start, but has surged in terms of their collective. Florida had one of the first collectives to start, and then it kind of fell off a little bit. And then you have a change, gets sold to somebody else. So now Florida Victoria certainly has way more backing by the coaches and by the university, but I think roughly the same membership. And Florida has to continually go to the same boosters over and over again to ask for money. It's tough. It's hard to ask for money and go 5 and 7 and then continue asking for money. But I think the conversation you have to have is, listen, I understand that the product on the field might not be what you want to donate to, but if you aren't donating, the product on the field will remain the same.
And Nick, what's the evaluation process if you're Florida? Because it seems like as you go further and further along into the Billy Napier era, you know, the intensity around that program seems to just kind of rise. What's the eval process right now for the Gators?
Yeah, listen, they've got if you're talking about players, they have their evaluation process. It takes a while. They really like grinding tape. I remember fans got mad. They asked players who I think had been pretty established to go through and tape some workouts for them because they wanted to see what they looked like, you know, currently. But Florida has a bunch of needs. They need depth, starters, talent, an influx of talent on both defense and offensive line. You need playmakers on the edges, on the defensive line, and at receiver. Florida has a lot of needs, and I think to look at the roster, it's not fair to compare them to Georgia and Alabama, but it is fair because next year we don't even have divisions, so you're competing against Alabama straight up. Florida's roster has a lot of work to do. And I think they need to be aggressive in the portal, which means you're also going to have to see several players leave that maybe you wouldn't have expected.
How much does Graham Mertz coming back change the dynamics of this?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I would be more surprised if Jack Miller is on the roster come spring or fall, which leaves you only with 2 scholarship quarterbacks. Now, getting Graham Mertz back and signing a guy like DJ Lagway, not really sure that you're going to get like a Dylan Gabriel or one of those top end quarterbacks to come and compete with Graham. So it's huge for Florida, I think, in terms of trying to get some skill position guys from the portal. But you're in a position where you're 2 sprained ankles away from starting a walk-on at quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how Florida handles the transfer portal when it comes to quarterbacks. And then also how do they handle high school recruiting? Because I think you're going to need 2 other guys just to fill out that room.
And you mentioned just some positions of need earlier, Nick. Overall with this roster, is this a spot where you think they need to lean pretty heavily on the portal? Is it something where you can kind of just tinker with it a little bit and maybe focus more on what you already have in-house? I mean, what's the overall landscape of the roster right now as it pertains to portal needs?
Florida has had, this coaching staff has had the mentality of we need to build our roster and our organization through high school recruiting and kind of like spot pick where we need to in the transfer portal. There's just so many needs. When I watched the SEC championship game, when I watched Florida even play at Kentucky, there's just so many glaring needs. And I think the seat will be very hot in 2024. I don't know that this coaching staff survives another 5 and 7. So while you've had that mentality of we need to just supplement through the transfer portal, you need to win next year in a big way. So I think there needs to be a huge emphasis and some urgency in the transfer portal period for Florida. Offense, defense, there's really not many positions you can point to and say they'd be okay not upgrading there.
So I would assume offensive line, like if you're talking about how do you portion your money out and how do you spend, I would think if you feel like you could get an SEC ready center or an SEC ready
cut the check,
like that's the one you write the check for, right?
Yeah. Defensive tackle, defensive end, receiver, offensive tackle. The issue I think is, when you're transfer portal shopping, you're not shopping at Neiman Marcus for offensive tackles, like elite offensive tackles. Baby. Elite offensive tackles go to elite schools. They play for 3 years and then they get drafted in the first round or second round. So, you might be at Dollar General shopping for offensive tackles, and that's just the way it is. I think there have been some good guards, and Florida got some production out of Micah Mazuka as a guard. But just to make that point, like there weren't many people that were upset about Michael Tarquin leaving last year. And then he was one of the best offensive tackles in the transfer portal, goes to USC and becomes a starter. So I see a lot of Florida fans saying, all right, we need to go out and get 6 to 8 starters on the offense and defensive lines. And I'm like, what world are we shopping? Yeah, there's lots of guys in the transfer portal.
There may not be 6 to 8 SEC quality offensive and defensive line starters in the portal the entire offseason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just comes down to finding a bargain. If you go thrift shopping, you can find exactly what you need. You go find the right FCS guy. You go find, I don't know, your Jared Verse maybe. If there is any of those in the portal, I'm sure Florida would be happy to acquire them. Nick, appreciate all your time, man. I know you got a lot going on right now on Portal Monday and everything going on with the Florida Gators postseason now that we're in, but appreciate you. And I'm sure we'll check back in here in the near future.
Thanks, guys.
Nick De La Torre from Gators Online. Great stuff. As always, get a membership there if you haven't already for this portal cycle.